Ignorance of Scripture is ignorance of Christ. He translated the Bible into Latin, making the Scriptures accessible to Western Europe and consequently the common man. His efforts shaped the theological, cultural, and literary development of the medieval and Renaissance West. His work became the authoritative Latin Bible for centuries and influenced countless subsequent translations of religious language and thought. This is the story of Saint Jerome of Stridon, an early Christian priest, confessor, theologian, translator, and historian. He is among early Christianity's most prolific writers and is one of the first 4 doctors of the Church. He is the patron saint of archaeologists, archivists, Bible scholars, librarians, libraries, schoolchildren, students, and translators. He was born Eusebius Sophronius Hieronymus at Stridon around the years 342 to 347. Jerome had wealthy Christian parents who provided him with a good education. He studied under the philologist Aelius Donatus, during which he learned Latin and Greek. He excelled in grammar and linguistics, the building blocks and an indication of his future legacy. As a student, he lived as a typical wealthy young man and engaged in sexual escapades and other excesses. While it appeared he enjoyed these acts during the time he did them, he was later consumed with guilt. To appease his conscience, on Sundays, he visited the sepulchres of the martyrs and the apostles in the catacombs. This experience reminded him of the terrors of hell. This conflict between pleasure and guilt eventually led him to further explore Christianity. Despite his fears and reservations about Christianity, he converted. Soon, he was consumed with a desire for staying away from material goods and towards a life of ascetic penance. He went to the desert of Chalcis to the southeast of Antioch, and lived the life of a hermit for about 3 years. During this period he devoted time to studying and writing, including and most importantly the Hebrew language. Jerome also translated several Christian books into Latin. He later wrote that he devoted his time to writing and studying to stay away from erotic fantasies and expunge them from his mind. However, he was also disillusioned as he discovered that some desert hermits he had known were not as saintly as he had thought. He gave up this life, he returned to Antioch and was ordained a priest. However, unlike most priests, Jerome never took on pastoral duties, preferring the life of studying and writing. He later traveled to Constantinople, where he studied Old Testament scripture under another esteemed scholar, this time the future saint, Archbishop Gregory of Nazianzus. He also spent more time studying and having an even deeper understanding the Church as expressed in the recent Nicene Creed. At Constantinople, Jerome also wrote the Chronicon meaning Chronicles or Temporum Liber meaning Book of Times. He wrote this universal chronicle around the year 380 and was a translation and expansion of the Chronicon of Eusebius. It was one of the earliest attempts at recording universal history. Around the year 382, Pope Damasus I summoned him to become his secretary and counselor. The Pope had taken an interest in his work and commissioned him to begin the Vulgate, a new translation of the Gospels. Jerome revised the Vetus Latina Gospels based on Greek manuscripts. He would later include the other books in the Bible, and the Vulgate became the authoritative Bible of the Catholic Church for centuries. Jerome surrounded himself closely with women and developed deep friendships with them. They were usually well-educated women, including some from the noblest patrician families. These ladies were often interested in asceticism, and Jerome's experience was appealing. Despite his closeness to these women, Jerome's writings were accused of being misogynistic. Among his most controversial thoughts were when he argued for virginity and celibacy, arguing that virgins were superior to married Christians. He also denounced women who wore makeup and fine clothing, equating these with vanity and sin. His actions toward Melania the Elder, a key figure in the Christian ascetic movement and with dark skin, were controversial. When they had a falling out, he attacked her with animosity and called her black in name and black in nature. However, his supporters claimed that a more nuanced view suggests that his arguments were often context-dependent and directed against specific ideologies rather than women themselves. For example, his vitriol towards Melania the Elder was because of her involvement in the pro-Origenist movement. Furthermore, his life involved deep and respectful relationships with noble women who were essential to his work and provided significant financial and intellectual support. As he spent time with these ladies in prayer, rumors began spreading about sexual impropriety. Jerome and the ladies were rightly indignant, but the rumors persisted. However, he mostly deflected these stories partly because of his closeness to the Pope. But when his patron, Pope Damasus I, died, there was an inquiry about his actions, including an alleged inappropriate relationship with a well-known widow named Paula and others. Jerome was forced to leave the city. He left Rome and established a monastery and convent in Bethlehem near the Church of the Nativity. He was initially accompanied by several of his female friends who bankrolled his initiatives. He would spend the rest of his life in Bethlehem. He would live as a hermit in the nearby caves, where he spent more than 20 years finishing the Bible's translation. He translated the New Testament from the original Greek, but more notably, he translated the Old Testament from the original Hebrew manuscripts. He had translated the Bible in a text that was easily understood and in a language spoken by the common people. After this task, he continued writing, which included translations of other works and letters. He also produced a number of commentaries where he explained his translation choices in using the original Hebrew and what he considered suspect translations. His translation of the Bible drew admiration but also controversy and criticism from some scholars. While he had translated portions of the Septuagint, he also began translating the Hebrew Bible from the original Hebrew. Prior to Jerome's Vulgate, all Latin translations of the Old Testament were based on the Septuagint, not the original Hebrew. Another source of controversy was his decision to translate the Hebrew book of Ezra-Nehemiah into the single book of Ezra. He maintained that the two books of Ezra were variant examples of a single Hebrew original. Jerome's decision to use a Hebrew text instead of the previously translated Septuagint went against the advice of most other Christians, foremost of which was another saint and church doctor, Augustine of Hippo. Jerome and Augustine, who were contemporaries, exchanged letters but never physically met. Augustine praised Jerome as a great scholar and a master of three tongues, but maintained that the Septuagint, alongside the Hebrew version, witnessed the inspired text of Scripture. He also noted the difficulty in finding any Hebrew-reading Christian scholar who could check Jerome's translation from the Hebrew version. They had other intense intellectual conflicts, such as an interpretation of Paul's rebuke of Peter in Antioch as recorded in the book of Galatians. They respected each other and continued to correspond. Eventually, they found a common ideological ground against the Pelagian heresy, which denied original sin. In 1546, the Council of Trent declared Jerome's Vulgate translation of the Bible to be the authentic and official Latin text of the Church, to be used in public lectures, sermons, and other church activities. This decree affirmed the Vulgate's authority and was a significant statement against the challenges to the Church's traditions during the Protestant Reformation. Jerome was a fiery theologian and fiercely defended Orthodox Christianity, writing polemics against heresies of the time, such as Arianism and Pelagianism. His sharp pen earned both admiration and controversy. Jerome was also a historian, and probably his most famous work in this field was the Chronicon, a translation, reworking, and continuation of the Chronicon of Eusebius. Among his better-known works was the De Viris Illustribus, which translates to On Illustrious Men. It was written in Latin and was a collection of short biographies of 135 authors. Another famous work was Life of Saint Hilarion. This hagiographical text was written around 390, detailing the life of Saint Hilarion, an influential ascetic and pioneer of monasticism in the Middle East. After Jerome's death, he was affirmed as a saint in the Catholic Church by popular acclaim. He is also a saint in the Eastern Orthodox Church, the Lutheran Church, and the Anglican Communion. In 1298, Pope Boniface VIII declared Jerome, along with other prominent theologians and Saints Ambrose of Milan, Augustine of Hippo, and Pope Gregory as doctors of the Church. Saint Jerome's feast day is September 30th. Thank you for watching. In your opinion, how important was Saint Jerome's translation of the Bible to Latin? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Please help us continue sharing the good word by liking and subscribing. Thank you.